Welcome back to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme parks, rides, and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And today we'll be diving deep into the jungle primeval on an adventure through the rivers of the world.
That's right, it's time for another Disneyland classic, an opening day attraction, the world-famous Jungle Cruise.
And Alice, I gotta say, I've been hearing a lot about this ride lately, and mostly the thing that people bring up when they start talking about it is skip the ride. It's not important. It's not an e-ticket. Your time is better spent elsewhere. What would you say to those people?
Well, buddy, I would say don't skip it. I would say don't skip it if it's your first time to a Disney park, if you've got time to stand in the line, if you want to experience a true Disney classic, definitely go for it. If you've been to Disney a whole bunch of times and you've ridden the ride a lot, then yeah, I guess maybe skip it. Sometimes the line may be not worth the experience, but it's definitely one of those classic rides that I think everybody should ride at least once.
Yeah, I think everybody should at least give it a shot, right?
Yeah.
And it really is one of my favorite rides for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that it has a really unique sight, sound, and smell package. No, seriously, the smell of the water, Disney water smell. A lot of people are really into that smell, and it brings me right back to my childhood riding the ride. It's that distinct. And not to mention, it's like a completely immersive 3D environment. The plants are so well grown that it covers everything. You don't really get the sense that it's connected to the rest of the park. It really feels like its own world. And that's worth something. I mean, it's not a thrill ride, right? But not every ride is a thrill ride, and it would be silly to make every ride be a thrill ride. Exactly.
It's got its place in theme parks. It's got its place in Disney, and it's, I don't know, it was always one of my favorites as a kid. I think I haven't been on it for a while, but that's mostly a line length issue, not a like I always want to go on it. Oh, we should ride the Jungle Cruise. Oh, it's a 2-hour wait. We should
2 hours is too much for the Jungle Cruise. I would say my limit on the Jungle Cruise is maybe a half-hour wait.
I would say 45 minutes, but yeah,
45 is also good. Yeah. But it's a good ride. I mean, like what's so great about it is the immersiveness of the experience, and I cannot discount the specialness of this opening day attraction that is also it's got that human element, right?
Right.
We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the presence of the skippers and what they bring to the table, I think elevate this ride beyond even its original intention. And that's so cool, and the unique culture surrounding the ride. It's no wonder it has its own fandom. So we should probably jump right in, right? So Alice, let's talk a little bit about what makes the Jungle Cruise special. And I think you've got a little bit of history for us.
So the Jungle Cruise was a opening day attraction. It opened with the Disneyland park on July 17th, 1955. The inspirations for building this attraction were films such as The African Queen, or novels such as The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, or other authors like Joseph Conrad or Daniel Defoe, inspired this British explorer-themed adventure. The original plan was to use real animals, but once Walt Disney realized the animals would most likely be asleep during the day, he scrapped that plan in favor of these animal-electronics.
And I do animal-electronics. That is a little bit of an inside joke that will come back up later. But I gotta say, Alice, it's funny to me that this would be the intent ever. Like, I need something that will work all the time for a lot of people to come through. What about actual real life animals? It sounds like a Jurassic Park setup, basically, right? You will have animals, on your jungle cruise, won't you? And you know that part in Jurassic Park where they're trying to get the T-Rex to come out. Like, imagine they're trying to get the hippos to come out, so they like bathe the water with like an antelope.
That would be very funny, and it's the classic example of Walt Disney's extremely huge vision for something like Disneyland being pared down a little to match his vision, but to make it a little more reasonable for audience.
Yeah, slightly
and
more realistic.
It's that huge vision that made him such a visionary to begin with. So aside from like alterations and maintenance, really the only difference from opening day Jungle Cruise to today's Jungle Cruise, they added about 4 new show scenes, with the last big additions being made in 1962 and 1976. In 1994, the river was rerouted a bit to make way for the Indiana Jones Adventure ride right next door. But other than just slightly shortening the river, it is mostly unchanged since 1976. They imported actual tropical plants and also made use of like what they call character plants, which are not necessarily exotic, but look exotic. In one particular trick they would use is he uprooted orange trees that were native to the area and replanted them upside down and growing vines on the exposed roots. So a lot of these tropical looking plants are just upside down trees with their roots in the air with vines strung over them to make them look kind of spooky. That's
ridiculous. And a lot of people don't know this if they aren't familiar with the history of the area. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, but the importance of Anaheim as a farming area, right? Anaheim was all farms back when Disneyland opened.
So many orange groves.
It was literally, it was an orange grove and also Anaheim chili grove. And
I think we mentioned this a little bit in our episode on California Adventure and the like homage to the oranges as being important to the area, and a little bit too in our Knott's Berry Farm episodes. But yeah, this whole area of Southern California was almost nothing. It was just trees and orchards as far as you could see. So Disney taking over this area, this farming community, and turning it into a destination adventure where you can hop on a boat and pretend like you are on a series of rivers in Asia, Africa, and South America, is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's incredible to see what it has become. And the other day I was looking at a photo of Adventureland in the 50s, and the foliage hadn't really grown in yet. So it was substantially less impressive. Like you could easily see right through to like a fence or the berm, and it was like, wow, that's kind of sad that it was like that. But then again, when you go to Adventureland now, it shows the planning of the whole thing and how intentional they were.
Right.
You can't see the sky. The foliage has completely enveloped the whole thing. It's truly isolating.
Right. The care and growth that goes into the jungle as part of the Jungle Cruise and Adventureland as a greater whole. This is a fun fact. In 2010, it was the man-made jungle as part of the Jungle Cruise was declared a real jungle. It's complete with its own ecosystem. That is because it's all of these plants that don't grow anywhere else in the area. It fosters its own ecosystem of bugs and birds and plants that rely on each other for further growth. And they do a really good job of taking care of those plants and helping them thrive in their not native temperate climate. That's what I have to say.
They're non-native conditions. Climes.
Sure.
And Alice, it's funny that, originally it was going to be kind of a wildlife showcase, and then it's kind of a wildlife preserve in its own way.
Yeah.
But and something you mentioned earlier is that you travel through all these different rivers, right?
Right.
From South America and Asia and Africa, all within this 8-ish minute tour. And that is something that's a little strange. It's something that to me has always felt like not a particularly well separated kind of theming, something that's not particularly effective. It kind of feels like when you're on it that they're all the same river.
Right. You stay on the same boat and just kind of go around a turn, and then the skipper says, "Now we're in Africa." And it doesn't necessarily feel like you've gone anywhere, because so much of this of the trees and stuff all remain the same. You have to rely on your skipper and on the animatronic animals to kind of give you a better idea of where you are, because you do cover several rivers over the course of the ride. You go on the Irrawaddy and Mekong River. That's supposed to be Southeast Asia, specifically Cambodia. And then they bring you to the rivers of Africa, where you cover the Nile and Congo rivers. And then you end up in the Amazon River in South America.
And if you don't believe us, then you're just in denial.
Oh, good one, buddy.
You know what? Totally original. Never heard it before, especially on the Jungle Cruise.
But yeah, the covering of all of these different areas, I think maybe combining them all into one attraction and treating them all as one idea maybe brings us to kind of something we should talk about always when we're talking about maybe Adventureland, and the theming of Adventureland and of this ride specifically. Maybe one of the biggest things I think we've covered on the show, and we want to make sure that we're covering it with the gravity that it deserves.
Right. This is a very serious topic, and typically our show is we will laugh and joke and have a good time. But when we decided to pick this ride and this literary term to go with it, we said to ourselves, we need to be careful that we speak with the respect that we generally might not. Because this is something that is still very alive in history, and something that we're kind of struggling with, maybe just on a general cultural sense. Our word of the day today is colonialism.
We're going to talk about colonialism, colonialist ideology, and a little bit of colonialist rhetoric when it comes to not just the Jungle Cruise, but its inspiration pieces. And while we could speak for hours on the subject, and people have written amazing books and theses and dissertations on this topic, we're just going to do as quick and respectful of an overview as we can. Because, Buddy, this is a difficult conversation to have, and this is a important subject that needs to be treated respectfully. We want to talk about Adventureland and how it's rife with examples of colonialist ideology and imagery, references colonialist literature in a way that's not altogether too critical. But we want to discuss it without saying, just tear down the Jungle Cruise, it's colonialist, get rid of it. We want to talk about history, why it's important to be aware of history, and then also how Disney and Adventureland and the skippers have evolved this colonialist history to, while treating it with humor, have been able to be a little more educational and a little less icky. It's not an easy conversation to have. And
we have done what we can to get some research in here and to talk about the subject as best we can, coming from a position of two pretty privileged people who benefit from a colonialist system's rewards, I guess. which is a weird way to say it, but who sit inside of what were colonies that became nations, and that place to be is complicated, and as is the Jungle Cruise and Adventureland writ large. It's a complicated space because these are cherished stories. These are stories that people really do love, and stories that have imagery that are appealing and exciting
and inspiring to so many people. This idea of an adventure, of exploration, of seeing new things and experiencing new cultures, have that kind of imagery inspired so many people to do really great things.
Right, but at the
sometimes
same time,
terrible, sometimes great.
At the same time, it has been the root ideology of incredibly heinous acts of violence and oppression and exploitation that benefit the colonizing nations and destroy the peoples that were colonized. So to give you the basic definition, colonialism is the practice of acquiring control over a country and its peoples. That is the most simple, concise way that we can talk about colonialism. And typically when we talk about the colonialist period, we're talking about 500 years of European dominance over much of the rest of the world. Europeans with their guns and various diseases and methods of control, going to other places and saying, this is Europe now. Give us your wealth and make your culture go away, please. Except probably not with a please, usually.
No, more like with a gun in your face.
Right, mostly with a gun. So it's important to note that this is perhaps the most notorious and impactful form of colonialism that has ever existed, especially on today. Our current geopolitics and media landscape is rooted in this European colonialist ideology, this kind of European exceptionalism. Europe being the best at things and bringing that bestness other places, being right and good regardless of the violence and oppression that comes with that. And we here at Those Happy Places do not believe that European exceptionalism and colonialism is right and good. But that was the attitude.
But it is part of the history, and it was directly inspired pieces of literature that inspired the Jungle Cruise, and so that's why we got to talk about it.
Right, and it also bears repeating that European colonialism also became American manifest destiny, and that is why the United States is what it is. And
that's a Frontierland conversation.
That is a Frontierland conversation, and we will have it when we get to Frontierland. So let's talk a little bit about some prominent examples of colonialist literature, because as we were saying, the Jungle Cruise, while taking imagery from popular adventure films of the time, such as The African Queen, and those steamer boats and their iconic design being almost exactly the African Queen's design. It also takes like the idea of a river adventure. I feel comes almost directly from Heart of Darkness and Joseph Conrad's novel about that. And Heart of Darkness is an incredibly difficult book, with so many scenes of violence, and just it's really, really gross and difficult to get through. But this idea that, you know, the jungle is deep and dark and mysterious, and you can travel down the river and see all of this adventure, and adventure being sure wild animals sometimes, but also dangerous tribes and war-torn areas and things like that, and that can be like an appealing thing. that can be like an adventure that bears repeating, that though Conrad does kind of come down on the side of this being gross and wrong and bad
and damaging
and corrupting. And so it's so funny that we have this kind of innocent retake of it in the form of the Jungle Cruise, right? This completely not damaging river cruise through most of the world, I guess. which is another thing, right? To say blanket term, jungle rivers are what this is. All jungle rivers.
Every jungle river.
It's all jungle
all
rivers all at once, because all of these places are foreign, and that means that they're all the same amount of adventurous to go to. And that's really gross, right? To think about. And this idea that, like, well, if there's a lion and if there's a rhino and if there's an elephant, then it's an adventure. And that's I know I'm being reductive, but so is the Jungle Cruise. I would call it a really reductive piece of literature. As much as I love it, as much as it's entertaining, it reduces the complexity of this system, this adventuring system circa 1938, to this very simple 8-minute trip through every river at once. And that's a lot. And you know, the most that we see of the human influence and the human effect on these rivers are that one expedition that is being chased up a pole by a rhino, and that other expedition that has been completely upended by gorillas. And that's it. There are no camps or trading stations or mining areas. I mean, the effects of colonialism were about economic extraction of wealth. And that is not on the Jungle Cruise. That is erased. Instead, what we see are research expeditions that have funny foibles, that have been in some ways overturned and like, oh, haha, nature's funny that way.
Well, it's also a little bit of a nature got the better of humans. Like, you think that you can come in here and explore and research, but gorillas got you instead. It's I never really considered that angle, but the Jungle Cruise doesn't have like canonically like successful explorers. They're all being chased away by nature or by like a tribe that's screaming at you from it's so problematic.
That whole part with the spears is actually right there in Heart of Darkness, actually.
Right.
So there's a part in Heart of Darkness where they believe that they are surrounded by a tribe that is attacking them, and they start firing wildly into the forest. And they never get hit by anything and never confirm that they hit anything. It's part of the slow madness that kind of captures all of our characters on the boat.
Right.
And then you know, we take that scene and we put it in the Jungle Cruise, and nothing is ever thrown. And we the audience don't respond in any way.
We just
I don't believe
sail
the
on
skippers,
down the river.
Right. I don't believe the skippers have ever fired their fake cap guns at the tribe.
God.
But if they ever did historically, that would be really horrible. And there's that scene, and it's what is removed is the detrimental kind of psychological effects that everybody would have had, not to mention all violence, right? Obviously, right. We do not want a ride where anybody exchanges spears and gunfire. That doesn't make any sense. But for example, on the Indiana Jones adventure, we get puffs of air. And in the current iteration of the ride, the skippers do that same sound effect. Get down, everybody.
But it's a joke. It's treated as a joke. Like you see him making the sound effects. Like he's like, right. Your skipper is in charge of that version of the narrative. Sometimes they make the spear sounds. Sometimes they make a joke about how, oh, they're not attacking, they're just waving at us, saying hello, and that
with their spears,
with their spears in their hand. That's a skipper choice.
Yeah. And we'll get a little bit more into the effect of the skipper later, but the effect of the scene is diminished, and it's sanitized, much like the rest of the river adventure, where these explorers are chased away by nature, which is not what happened. What really happened was nature was maybe dangerous for a second, and then more soldiers with guns showed up until nature was not dangerous. And then economic extraction of wealth and destruction of culture could begin. So that was strange to me to make that comparison. The comparison between Conrad's very dark novel and this bright, cheery adventure. The other one that I really wanted to bring up was Robinson Crusoe, which is the story of an Englishman who is washed up on a deserted, or he believes it to be a deserted island. And the claiming that happens. He claims this island as his own. He plants some crops and builds a little hut, and he lives on this island for I forget how long, but it's a long time. It's like 10 years. Not to mention finding out that the island is not deserted and that there is a tribe of cannibalistic people, which is very I would say kind of standard adventure fare, like, oh no, there's a tribe of cannibals, which is incredibly disrespectful, but that is a stereotype that authors were exploiting for the excitement of it, I guess.
I just wanted to pop in really quick because I just looked it up. Real-time research. He spends 28 years on this desert island.
28 years.
Mm-hmm.
And over that time, tries to make it as close to England as possible.
He is, by the way, in Trinidad.
Oh, that's where he is. Interesting. Yeah. The thing about Robinson Crusoe that stuck with me after reading it, because it is not a very easy or fun to read novel, because I just cannot get past the writing style and the narrative. But after reading it, the thing that stuck with me the most was that Robinson Crusoe believes that he is right, and that this is his destiny, and claiming this piece of land as England and measuring it and cataloging it are all good and righteous, and literally he believes that God sent him a message to do this. In a couple of parts, he's like, and I knew that this was divine intervention that meant for me to succeed at this task. And I just, does the Jungle Cruise espouse this ideology? Maybe not.
I don't think it quite goes that far.
I don't know if it goes that far, but there is this feeling of we can be welcome here, so we are welcome here. Like, we are allowed to view this. This is a space that we can just tour casually. And we are allowed.
The show building, like the line building, establishes you are within. Here, let me pull it actually up. It's the queue and station are themed as the headquarters and boathouse of the Jungle Navigation Company, which is a river trading company located in a British colony, circa 1938. So you've got, like, they fly the Union Jack above the, above where you board the boats, and they establish what year it is. It's 1938, and you are British, and you are in a British colony, and we're trading down this river, and the British were notorious for that kind of colonialism.
The sun
we
never
live
sets
here
on
now.
the British Empire.
Exactly.
It's always
the kind
England
of
somewhere.
we live here now, and this is our colony, and we're going to trade our way. Hop on this boat and go see a new place that you haven't seen before.
And we are meant to identify ourselves then as British citizens, circa 1938, who have the wealth and privilege of casually taking a tour around the world's rivers, and on a very comfortable steamboat. And that's an interesting position to put your audience. It's an assumption. It's assuming that your target audience can identify that way.
Or wants to identify that way. Or wants to.
And that's very 1955 of this ride.
Very, very 1955. Yes, that's a good way to put it. The story of this ride, the plot that it puts you in, is a product of 1955. And the show, the set pieces, the animatronics, nothing about it really, like I said, has changed since 1976, where we were still in that position culturally, but we're not really there anymore.
And there has been a lot of work done to kind of not be there anymore. We are, I think, as a culture, trying to open up to realizing the negative effects of colonialism, and maybe to fixing them in whatever small ways we can. Obviously, it can't go back. And obviously, the hurt that was done cannot be undone. But there's a rising awareness, I think, in our media culture, and in our academic culture of how bad colonialism was, and just how casually we think of it as a good thing, without even realizing what actually happened. Like how the West was won, right? This idea that it was won and then civilized, I say with the biggest air quotes that I can, and made part of America, and that's what freedom is. Or, that story repeated for any European nation that was doing the colonizing thing. And it's not over. Colonialism is not over.
No.
We are not post-colonial, but there has been a rising post-colonial attitude, at least. It's this idea that we should be critical of these things, at the very least, question the Jungle Cruise. Ask the question. Why would we reduce a tribal dance and chant to the hokey pokey?
Oh.
I know, right? Or, why do we even feel that it's okay to reduce a tribal dance and chant to animatronics that dance in a circle? Like, there's no way that's how it actually looked, right? It's just how we kind of imagine it looked collectively through the colonialist lens. And the colonialist lens sometimes is invisible to people, so they just kind of go, oh yeah, that's about right. And they never ask the question. And I think a big thing about Adventureland is that it doesn't try to make the leap. It has chosen another path. It doesn't have the educational components. At Knott's Berry Farm, for example, there is a very cool attraction called the Mystery Lodge. And the Mystery Lodge was built in conjunction and in partnership with local Native American tribal leaders who consulted on the way that the Native American storyteller in the ride would tell the story. And the Mystery Lodge is cool for the way that it tries to say, hey, we are Native Americans. Hey, we are still here. This is a part of our culture that we are cool with sharing. This is not a stand-in for our actual culture, but kind of just a small representative snippet of it. And I feel like that's a much better way of navigating the badness of colonialism than what we do end up with Adventureland, which is kind of, this is a silly, almost imaginary time.
Right.
And Adventureland really does focus on the imagination of it.
Right. To give Disney just a little bit of credit back, I want to jump on over to Orlando to the Animal Kingdom. Disney's Animal Kingdom, as part of Walt Disney World, has a huge focus on present conservationist efforts. They are currently working on preserving animal life and native lands, specifically for animals, which doesn't solve colonialism. But Disney, I think in recent years has realized that this is maybe it's PR, but it's an appropriate stance to take on. Maybe they don't acknowledge that we humans have caused damage to these lands, but at least they're acknowledging that it's time to start fixing these things. So because humans and culture aren't the only things that are harmed by colonialism. So Disney has gone for, let's help nature. Let's try and conserve animals and their habitats and these parts of the world that we haven't trampled all over. And so I wonder if there was a place, if there's a place or a future in Adventureland, both in Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom, if there's a place to add an educational component. The Animal Kingdom has done it. You can go through your safari and you can do the walkthrough where you meet people who are there, like actively trying to conserve lands and educating people on conservationist efforts. Is there a place in Adventureland for doing that, but for cultures?
I think that's a thing. I think that's possible, and I think that might be the solution to Adventureland's awkward position within Disneyland. And I think because the current solution is not to educate. As I said, it's a kind of a helpful abstraction to say help nature now, right? Like it helps us because we don't want to go to our family-friendly theme park and be like, violence, death, and slavery, guys. So recover nature and rediscover the natural beauty and majesty of these lands kind of abstracts it to also maybe the cultures that were here before colonialism should be preserved and helped as well. But it's too abstract, it's not direct enough, and I don't think it does the job the way that it could if Adventureland went post-colonialist, which would be really exciting, but extremely expensive and kind of in reverse of what Adventureland is currently, which is this celebration of, yes, a almost imaginary adventurer archetype. And I say almost imaginary because there's this very real thing where people like went to not the jungle, but to these other places and quote unquote discovered them and then claimed them and exploited them. But we're kind of imagining them the way that we would imagine cowboys. Cowboys, the way that we imagine them, never really existed. The quick shooter, duels in the streets, like lone wandering gunfighter warrior guy, like those guys didn't exist. What really existed were people moving herds of cattle,
and outlaws who were criminals who committed crimes. They were robbers and thieves.
Right,
that's where you get that shootout. But that's where you get that shootout imagery. Like those things actually did, like we have record of like shootouts happening.
Sure. But not nearly in the numbers that your Western film would have you believe.
No,
right?
but you're conflating. What they do is combine the two identities of the like the cattle herder with the outlaw, and that's where we get our movie imagery of a cowboy. Right. And so the Adventureland idea of the explorer combines this is somebody who's going to go conquer the land to exploit it. And then also, like, they are also doing research and just learning and mapping and
Indiana Jones. They're cataloging and saving things and putting idols back where they belong, and it belongs in a museum.
Or taking them to museums
taking them to museums forever. And that's the thing, is that there's no matter how you slice it, these made up good quote unquote adventurer colonialists, they're always going to be a little icky. Even Indiana Jones, Nazi puncher, is a little gross when you think about it, because who are you to say it belongs in a museum? Whose museum?
Probably belongs
Yours?
Back where you found it.
Right. At least in Temple of Doom, he actually does put it back.
Yes.
And that does solve the problem. But in most of it, it's, I'm going to go to this place and claim this thing, and it belongs in a museum. The Ark of the Covenant, one of the holiest relics of an entire people, gets put in a box in a warehouse because America knows what's best for it. I mean, right. that moment is framed as wrong, but it's framed as wrong because Indiana Jones wants to put it in a museum in Chicago, not in a box in a warehouse. So who's really more wrong? I don't know. They're both equally wrong. You're
losing either way.
Right. So that's the thing about colonialism. How do you rewrite it in a way that heals instead of hurts? How do you rewrite it in a way that's positive without being icky? I don't think anybody has, at least not in a mainstream big way at a theme park. I hope there's an author out there who is doing that work. And I would be very happy to hear about them.
And I think I just want to say, not rewriting it like rewriting history. Oh, they were actually doing good things. Not a revisionist.
Recontextualizing it in a way that maybe even imagines the power back in the hands of the people who didn't have power.
But it's just such a massive topic that we cannot cover in a 1-hour podcast.
Not only are we not the best people to talk about it, we are highly limited in our format. But we've hinted at it, and we've hinted at it, and we've hinted at it, and I think it's time to move on to the topic of the skippers.
Yes.
Because in the face of this kind of mass waking up to colonialism and its grossness, and in the face of the kind of aging ideas of this 1955 attraction, the skippers, I think, have been the solution. So do you want to take a moment here to listen to some voicemail?
Why, yes. Let's take a moment here. We got an awesome voicemail left by one of our very favorite listeners, Charles Gustine of the Iconography podcast, and he has some thoughts about the Jungle Cruise.
All right, let's roll that clip.
Hey there, Alice and Buddy. It's Charles Gustine from Iconography Podcast. I am super stoked that you guys are covering Jungle Cruise and its skippers, and I hope this voice message gets across to you in time to mull it over before you record. So, from where I'm sitting, Jungle Cruise is one of the most fascinating set pieces, not just in Disney, but all of theme parks. Because Rare is the ride where you have a human guide along with you for the whole thing. The defunct backstage tour at MGM, Kilimanjaro Safaris at Animal Kingdom come to mind, but in both those instances, the guide is providing context. They're an active participant in telling the story in conjunction with the ride elements. It's like they're another ride element. But a Jungle Cruise skipper is doing something really different. If you could mute the skipper, you'd have an entirely different experience on Jungle Cruise. You'd be looking at the flora and fauna of the world, travel the most famous rivers. And thanks to the dated animatronics, and the dicey racial politics, it'd be hokey and cheesy, but it wouldn't be funny. It would just be. Unless someone in your group was whispering sly asides that made you giggle about how lame it all is, and then it would be funny. And that's the remarkable thing about Jungle Cruise is Disney puts that person on the boat for you and gives them a microphone. There's an easy-to-imagine alternate world in which Disney iteratively improved the Jungle Cruise animatronics to keep them appropriately majestic, up to the wow factor, kept them really terrifying, like the T-Rex on Jurassic Park River Adventure. But instead, fairly early on, it seemed like Disney did something I don't think they've done anywhere else. They intentionally take you out of the experience. Rather than trying to immerse you and convince you you've been transported to the Nile, they make it clear you're on an artificial ride with robot lions and a comedian making puns at you. If you had to classify Jungle Cruise in a literary genre, you couldn't just say it's a parody. It's more like a redub, like the funny lip dub videos of presidential debates on YouTube or Mystery Science Theater 3000. These experiences all share one thing. You're seeing something that had pretensions of being something else, but what you're hearing works against those pretensions. It doesn't just deflate them, it pops them. What's extra remarkable about Jungle Cruise, what makes it, I think, completely unique in all the world, is that you're immersed in that experience. Not the wildlife documentary experience that Disney designed, but like an MST3K episode made 3D. The skippers are breaking the fourth wall when there are no walls. Except at Disney, there usually are walls and you can't see them. There are these imagined walls of sort of the Disney dignity. This ride is famous among otherwise buttoned-down Disney employees, cast members, who can only point in one specific way because this is the one place where Disney licenses them to let their hair down. And you can tell they love it. It's like the killer is calling you from inside the house. And I don't think the same thing would really work at any other park because you would expect it. Anyway, I'm excited to hear you two talk about it. And by the way, I really love the new mic setup.
Thank you, Charles, for your thoughts and for your participation in this episode. Let's talk about the skippers, which, as you correctly point out, get to be more loose than pretty much any cast member in the park.
I mean, yeah, skippers get to they get to add the humor to the ride, and the ride's point now, I think, beyond adventuring is to be funny. I feel like that's the thing it's offering. It's not to be like amazing or majestic. It's supposed to be funny. Like, that's the thing, right? That's the main appeal of the ride. So the skippers are integral to that. They are the way that the ride has been retrofitted. They get to add levity to what this ride, which has overall only become more problematic over time. And this is what the ride needs. It needs this. Otherwise, it would be pretty boring.
Or just problematic.
Or just plain old problematic. So, like, you could, I suppose, try to make it a very intense, quote-unquote, adventure with lots of yelling and screaming and being scared. But that would make it worse. That would highlight the problematic parts.
Right.
So instead we lowlight them with funny jokes and puns.
Right.
And
the skipper gets to be the interpreter of the ride. They get to make it funny. They get to pull in the puns. They're not just commentating or making jokes, but they're contextualizing this thing, which has become increasingly alien since its opening. It's not just commentary, it's not just jokes, it's both.
Yeah, it's a way to say, yes, we realize how silly and bad some of this is. And Charles, you pointed out in your voicemail to us that, like, the animals don't look that majestic. They're not very impressive. I would say that they are kind of still impressive, though. I do really love. They're incredibly charming.
The elephants, I think, are still very impressive.
They're still very cool.
And I'm not just saying that because elephants are my very, very favorite animal.
No, but the elephant taking a bath in the waterfall is like...
It's so cute.
It's iconic. It looks great. I think the hippos still look great. And some of the newer animatronics, like the snake, is pretty great. And the gorilla. They're not amazing, but they are quite good. They're not convincing, but they're very charming. But the skipper gets to say, I know how fake this is. And you're right, Charles. Nowhere else do we say, at Disneyland especially, nowhere else do we say, this is fake and bad. Nowhere else does anybody get to say that. But the skippers can make a joke about somebody on the boat and be like, haha, sir, your hat is bad, and so is this ride. My favorite Skipper line ever is, there's something you don't see every day, but I do every 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
And that's amazing.
It's a big joke, and it's giving you this context of, like, yes, we're on a ride. Clearly, this is a ride. These animatronics are fake and old. And this world, this explorer's world that we are in, does not exist anymore. This is a totally foreign concept that hasn't existed since the 30s. And we're not in the 30s. And you know that. That's what the skipper's saying. You know this. I know this. Let's have fun.
Yeah, and what's great about it is that maybe the majesty and the righteous explorer attitude wore off really fast.
Yeah, probably pretty quick.
Probably pretty quickly. People were like, "Whoa, wait a second." I realized that this is not great. But the thing that didn't go away was this seed of discomfort that kept growing and growing as we got more and more aware of how the ride's a little gross. And the skippers provide that necessary context of saying, yeah, we get it too. And we get it, and we're the approved interpreters of this ride, and we get it. And that's, I think, a really clever way of dodging the uncomfortable colonialism. It's a way to kind of get out in front of it, almost, and be like, yes, joke. This is a joke. This is imaginary. It's not a real thing. We're not in favor of it.
This is not the world we live in now. We are better than this now.
Yeah, it's silly now. It's silly. It's just fun, guys. Haha, right?
Yeah, but is that right to do? Is by making fun of, say, the tribal dance and making fun of it and calling it the hokey pokey, for example, are we taking away the power of that kind of racism, or are we making light of it? And like does it become, oh, isn't it funny how racist we used to be? Or is it saying, we're not racist?
Oof,
like,
both of those options, Alice, are
I know.
so.
I know.
And I think that is the thing, is that it might not be right. It is what we have.
It is what we have.
That doesn't make it right. For example, Trader Sam, last animatronic of the ride, offers the boat shrunken heads. Well, the thing is, I think originally Trader Sam was just an oddity, right? Like, oh, here's a guy with shrunken heads. Look out. He shrinks heads. The skipper contextualizes that moment. Oh, here's Trader Sam, one of the most successful traders in the jungle. He's got a 2-for-1 special, two of his heads for one of yours. We all joke about beheadings. So we have this like character that has been made kind of a piece of the context that skippers are expected to give us. But it doesn't make that moment like not a pile of skulls. You know?
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
It doesn't make that moment not look at how strange and odd the shrunken head salesman is. Like this is some kind of exhibit. It doesn't say anything about why shrunken heads were ever a thing. It doesn't say anything about, were they common at all? It doesn't educate us in the slightest. It just kind of makes a uncomfortable moment a funny moment, because humor in response to discomfort is a very human reaction. In fact, I would say that humor in response to discomfort might be the highest form of humor. I mean, The Office, Alice.
Oh, don't get me started.
Right? You cringe, and that's why you laugh. But is this the space for that? Probably not.
But also, if this isn't the space for it, if Disneyland, where you're going to have fun with your family and enjoy yourself, isn't the space for making jokes, where would you make a joke?
Interesting.
If you're going to make a joke about it, if you're going to say let's laugh and be uncomfortable at the same time, and maybe provoke a conversation, if you're the sort of family that after an experience like that gets together and has a conversation about that kind of thing, where else to do it but Disneyland?
And I think it does speak to the power of theme parks. I mean, I know that that's kind of the point of the show, but this is a thing that millions of people will go on, and millions of people have gone on. And to say that it's relatively unchanged, aside from some new scenes, for over, now 60 years, and that it can provoke those conversations, but also maybe it isn't, is part of the point of those happy places, which is to say, this is mass media. It reflects on our culture that it exists and is popular. What is the point? How are we responsible with it? Are we irresponsible? How is it evolving and changing? And here we are stuck only with questions about the Jungle Cruise. And Alice, as you said, we're not the people to offer solutions. But we can at least talk about the problem. And I think that does make the Jungle Cruise valuable, at least to us here now.
Yes.
Not to mention that movie's coming up with Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
My boyfriend, Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
You guys are dating still?
Oh, yeah. Oh, didn't you know?
Yeah.
Don't tell my fiance.
I won't. I knew that you had gone on some dates, but I didn't know it was like a boyfriend-girlfriend thing.
No, yeah, he's definitely my boyfriend.
Oh, good.
We're very close.
Is he as nice in person as he seems on screen?
He's even nicer.
So, Alice, just because the movie is coming, maybe this is our chance. Maybe Disney is thinking maybe this is our chance, and this could be the chance that they need to say, hopefully the movie takes off. If the movie doesn't take off, it's not their chance, and hopefully the movie is quality. But this could be the chance to say we need to rethink what this cruise is. We need to kind of go through and recontextualize, and maybe the film will have something to say about colonialism. Looking at the materials that we have so far, and there are not many, but looking at the materials we have so far, I wonder if they can. I wonder if there's anything there.
I wonder.
Because right now it doesn't seem that way.
The rumors coming out of the set include a character playing and I want to clarify, as of right now, September 1st, 2018, not confirmed, but there's a rumor going around that one of the characters is going to be a really campy gay guy. Which doesn't sound super great.
And the actor who is playing this character is straight.
Not gay.
Right.
Yeah. So far where we are right now in September 2018, this time capsule here does not sound very promising, but we'll get there. We'll see.
And look forward to that follow-up episode when the film comes out, because movies that are based on theme park rides that had their inspiration in movies is so a jam for this podcast.
Yeah, we should start throwing in episodes on
theme park movies.
We'll start with Pirates of the Caribbean, the best one.
Well, you know what, Alice? I think we should start with the Country Bear Jamboree, the worst one.
The worst one. You know, that movie came out on my 12th birthday.
Wow. Oh, dating yourself there, Alice. Alice, we got to some really deep places today, and I just want to say thank you for a really interesting conversation that I hope anybody out there listening to it at least found something to think about and maybe wants to give us a little bit of an opinion about.
Yeah.
But please, let's always be respectful, and let's always be choosing kindness towards each other.
Absolutely. We want to have this conversation with you, and we want to have this respectful conversation with you, our listeners. And Buddy, where can they have that conversation with us?
Well, Alice, this has been Those Happy Places, and you know that my name is Buddy Duquesne.
And my name is Alice White.
So that means that my Twitter handle is Buddy_Duquesne, and Duquesne is spelled Duquesne.
And you can find me on Twitter at Alice White THP for Those Happy Places. We want to have this conversation with you. Please reach out to us on Twitter. We love having conversations about theme parks and about even deeper conversations like this one. We're always there.
Yeah, we are.
We are always there. I am always on Twitter.
Even when I'm not on Twitter, Twitter is calling me, saying come back. So Alice, you did the research for this episode, and I will have edited this episode when our listeners are hearing it.
And if they're listening to it right now, they're probably hearing our theme music, which is Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers featuring Phil Alvin. And you can find that music on their website, CaliforniaFeetwarmers.com.
That's right. And, there's probably some additional music that I'm going to edit into this episode. Did you know that all of our additional music comes from Podington Bear?
From the Free Music Archive?
That's right. And you can totally look him up on the freemusicarchive.org, which is an amazing source for podcasters looking for free music tracks for all of their podcasting needs.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. Send people to our website at www.thosehappyplaces.com and join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/thosehappyplaces, where we're always talking about theme parks and ideas for future episodes.
That's right. And Alice, did you know that we're also on iTunes, Podcast, Stitcher, Podcast, the
Podbean, Overcast,
Castbox, Podcast Addict. You can find us. We are on every podcatcher. We are not on Spotify.
No, not yet.
Yet.
We'll figure that out.
We will get there. Alice, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Buddy, thank you for this episode and for this conversation. You're the best co-host that a girl could ask for.
Well, you know what? No, you're the best co-host that a girl could ask for. And I do want to say, Alice, that there is one other thing that you should send our listeners to, and that is Rogue Fun, a podcast story.
I host a monthly Star Wars podcast called Rogue Fun, a podcast story with the incomparable T.H. Ponders. We just dropped episode 3, and we had a really good conversation about facial expressions and hairstyles, and and you can find that wherever podcasts are found. We're on iTunes and Overcast and all of that.
Excellent.
And on Twitter at Rogue Fun Pod.
Excellent. Anyways,
thanks for that plug, buddy.
No worries, Alice. You know what? I'd like to thank the listeners now. Thank you, listeners.
Yes, thank you all for listening.
And we hope you return to those happy places.